On my 68th birthday, the silence of the last 3 years was broken by a cardboard box left on my porch. There was no card, no sender's name on the outside, just a plain package sitting there in the cool Ohio air, an island of mystery in the quiet sea of my life in Northwood. I recognized the handwriting on the label immediately, though, the way the A looped, the sharp, decisive cross of the Tay. It was Leo's, my son. The handwriting was a ghost, a voice from a time before the quiet had settled in, a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a long time, hope, maybe stirred in my chest. It was a foolish thing, that hope, but it was there. I carried the box inside and set it on the old oak table, the same table where Leo had once done his homework, his small face scrunched in concentration. With my worn pocket knife, I slit the tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of shredded paper, was a bottle of whiskey. Not just any whiskey. It was a limited edition, single malt, the kind of bottle that costs more than a week's groceries. Its label a deep forest green with elegant gold lettering. Taped to its side was a small, plain white envelope. I opened it. On the crisp cardstock inside, 2 words in that same familiar hand. Happy birthday, no dad, no signature. Just 2 words standing at a distance, as cold and impersonal as the glass of the bottle they were attached to. The flicker of hope in my chest died out, leaving behind a familiar ache. I ran a thumb over the wax seal, the smooth surface, a stark contrast to the rough calluses on my hand. Whiskey. It used to be my drink, a small ritual at the end of a long day. But that was before the heart attack, before the doctors drew a firm line through the small pleasures of my life. Alcohol was on that list, right at the top. Leo had been there, in that sterile hospital room, when the doctor explained it all. He had heard every word. He knew. So this gift wasn't a peace offering. It was a sign of how far we'd drifted, a testament to the fact that my son no longer knew the basic facts of my life. Or worse, he didn't care to remember. The bottle, for all its beauty, felt like an insult. I pushed it across the table and thought of David Miller. David, my kind and generous friend, Olivia's father, Leo's father-in-law. A man who still enjoyed the warmth of a good drink on a cold night. He would appreciate this. He would give this silent, expensive object a story worth telling. That night, the house felt even quieter than usual. I ate my solitary dinner and was washing the dishes when the landline rang, its shrill cry startling in the stillness. I dried my hands and picked it up. Dad. Leo's voice was smooth, casual, as if 3 years of silence were nothing more than a brief pause in a conversation. You got my gift? He asked. I did, I said, my own voice carefully neutral. Well, what'd you think? Did you try it yet? There was an edge to his question, an insistence that felt out of place. No, I told him. I gave it to David. Thought he'd get more use out of it. The line went dead silent. It wasn't the crackle of a bad connection. It was a heavy, deliberate silence, thick with something I couldn't name. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the hum of my own refrigerator. Then, huh, he said, the sound sharp, clipped. The line clicked, and he was gone. I stood there, holding the receiver, a cold dread creeping into my bones. The dread was still with me the next morning when my phone rang again. It was David's wife, her voice frantic, laced with panic. Arthur, it's David. He's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning. I gripped the counter, my knuckles turning white. What happened? They don't know, she cried. His heart, it's arrhythmia. They think it might be some kind of poisoning. The word hung in the air between us, monstrous and unbelievable. He was fine last night, she sobbed. We had a drink with dinner, a glass of that whiskey you brought over. My blood ran cold. The whiskey. Leo's silence on the phone last night wasn't confusion. It was something else. It was the sound of a plan going wrong. After the call, I walked through my house in a daze. My mind replayed the last 48 hours, searching for a piece that made sense. I went to the kitchen, to the small glass jar on the back of the shelf, where I'd poured a small taste of the whiskey before taking it to David, a habit from my banking days, to keep a record of things. The amber liquid sat there, innocent and deadly. As I stared at it, a memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharp, the trash. I'd cleaned out a drawer yesterday morning and tossed an old, empty vitamin vial, a small, unlabeled plastic bottle. I had seen it in the bottom of the can. Now, a cold certainty settled over me. I had to know. I called Gary, a friend from my army days who'd become a chemist. "I need you to test something for me," I said, my voice tight. "And I need you to be quiet about it." "Oh." Before I left for Gary's lab, I went to take out the kitchen trash. As I lifted the bag, something felt wrong. It was lighter than it should have been. I set it down and looked inside. The coffee grounds from yesterday were there, the empty milk carton, the junk mail, but the small plastic vial I had seen nestled at the bottom was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked the back door. Locked. The windows. Latched. No sign of a break-in, but someone had been in my house. Someone with a key. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. The realization was a physical blow. This wasn't just a thoughtless gift. This was a calculated act, and the person behind it was now covering their tracks. Gary's lab was on the industrial edge of Northwood, a place of concrete and quiet purpose. He met me at the door, his face grim. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He took the jar and disappeared into the back. I waited in the sterile quiet of his office, the minutes stretching into an eternity. When he returned, he was holding a printout, his expression unreadable. He slid the paper across the desk. "You were right to be suspicious, Arthur." My eyes scanned the technical terms until they landed on two words I understood. Eupatorium rugosum. "White snake root," Gary said softly. "It's a cardiotoxin. In the right dose, it mimics a heart attack, especially in someone with a pre-existing condition." He looked at me, his gaze steady and filled with a terrible understanding. This wasn't an accident. The concentration is too precise. Someone made this to be a weapon. The hospital waiting room was a blur of muted colors and hushed voices. I found Olivia, Leo's wife and David's daughter, huddled in a chair, her face pale and tear-streaked. I sat beside her, not knowing what to say. After a moment, she turned to me, her voice a raw whisper. "I don't understand. He was fine." I hesitated, then made a choice. "Olivia, has Leo been acting strangely lately?" Her eyes widened in surprise, then filled with a dawning fear. "How did you know?" she said. "He's been distant. He spends hours out in that old warehouse his company owns. He said it was for a new project, some kind of herbal supplement line." She wrung her hands. "He's become obsessed with it. Books about botany, chemistry. I saw jars of dried plants out there. I thought it was just a strange new hobby." "Oh?" Armed with Olivia's words, I knew what I had to do next. I drove to the home I had helped my son buy, the home where I was no longer welcome. Leo answered the door, his surprise quickly masked by a practiced, easygoing smile. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I stepped inside, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I kept my voice calm, conversational. "Just heard about David. Terrible news." I watched his face. There was no flicker of guilt, only a cautious curiosity. I steered the conversation, talking about his new hobby, the warehouse. As I spoke, my hand rested in my jacket pocket, my thumb pressing the small, discreet button on a digital recorder. I watched him build his wall of lies, one casual, contradictory statement at a time. He denied knowing anything about toxins, claimed the herbs were for aromatherapy, and insisted the whiskey was just a well-intentioned gift. The recording captured it all, the smooth deceptions, the hollow reassurances, the voice of a man who believed he was smarter than everyone in the room. I left Leo's house with the recording burning a hole in my pocket. There was no more doubt, no more hope for a misunderstanding. There was only the cold, hard truth. I drove not home, but to the Northwood police station. The building was old brick, solid and imposing. It felt like the last stop on a long, dark road. I asked for Detective Reyes, a name I knew from the local paper. He was a young man, but his eyes were old with the things he had seen. I sat across from him in his small, cluttered office and laid it all out. The gift, the silence on the phone, the missing vial, Gary's lab report, and finally, the recording. I pushed the small device across the desk. "He's my son," I said, the words tasting like ash. and I think he tried to murder me. The next day, the story began to leak, not from the police, but from the quiet, interconnected network of a small town. It started with Megan Carter, a young reporter for the Northwood Gazette. She was sharp, and she had a nose for stories that hid behind closed doors. She must have heard whispers from the hospital staff or seen the police car at my house. She called me, her voice professional but with an undercurrent of genuine curiosity. I gave her nothing but a polite, no comment, but her call was a signal. The bubble of privacy had burst. The story was no longer just mine. It belonged to the town now. Detective Reyes worked fast. Armed with my testimony and Olivia's statement about the warehouse, he went to a judge. By late afternoon, he had a search warrant in his hand. The legal machinery had begun to turn, its gears grinding slowly but with unstoppable force. He called to let me know they were proceeding. "Stay home, Arthur," he warned. "Let us do our work." I agreed, but staying home felt like being caged. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that passed on the street, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The waiting was its own kind of torture. The call from Reyes came just after dusk. "We're at the warehouse," he said, his voice grim over the line. "You were right. They found it all. A makeshift lab hidden in a back room. Books on toxicology and herbal poisons. And on a dusty shelf, a series of jars, meticulously labeled. But the worst was yet to come. We found a notebook, Arthur," Reyes said, his voice dropping. "It's a ledger. It looks like he was testing dosages." A long pause. We found two sets of initials next to the formulas. DM and AH. David Miller, Arthur Hayes. My own name, written in my son's hand, next to a chemical equation designed to stop a human heart. They arrested Leo at his home an hour later. I didn't see it happen, but I didn't have to. I felt it. A seismic shift in the foundation of my world. The son I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, was now in police custody, accused of a crime so monstrous it felt like something from a movie. The carefully constructed peace of Northwood had been shattered, and my family was at the epicenter of the blast. Megan Carter's article appeared online that night, a factual but devastating account of the arrest. The quiet war had become public, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the battle had only just begun. In the days that followed, Leo hired a lawyer, a man named Caldwell, who was known for his sharp suits and even sharper courtroom tactics. The first move came in the form of a statement to the press. It was a masterpiece of deflection. It spoke of a tragic misunderstanding, a family dispute spiraling out of control, and painted me as a grieving, confused old man lashing out at his only son. It was the first volley in a war of perception, and Caldwell was a master strategist. He wasn't trying to prove Leo's innocence. He was trying to assassinate my character. The preliminary hearing was a blur of legal jargon and procedural motions. The first real blow came when Caldwell argued to have the notebook, the death ledger, as the press had dubbed it, thrown out. He called it the fictional ramblings of a troubled mind, nothing more than creative writing. The judge didn't buy it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The strategy was clear. If you can't dispute the evidence, dispute the sanity of the man who found it. The trial began on a cold morning in November. I sat behind the prosecution, a ghost at my own son's trial. The key testimony came from David Miller. He walked to the stand slowly, leaning on a cane, a physical embodiment of Leo's crime. He spoke simply, his voice clear and steady, describing the bitter taste of the whiskey and the terrifying collapse of his body. He was a sympathetic, unimpeachable witness, and I saw a few of the jurors nod as he spoke. Olivia's testimony was the most painful. She wept as she recounted her husband's secretive behavior, her voice breaking as she identified the jars and the notebook found in the warehouse. Caldwell's cross-examination was brutal. He insinuated that she was a scorned wife, manufacturing a story to punish her husband. But through her tears, she held her ground. "I loved him," she said, looking at the jury. "But I loved the truth more." Then it was my turn. I took the stand and looked at my son. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, a stranger in a bright orange jumpsuit. I told my story from the moment the package arrived to the call from Detective Reyes. Caldwell's cross-examination was a surgical attack. He brought up old family arguments, financial disagreements, anything to create a narrative of a bitter father seeking revenge. "Isn't it true, Mr. Hayes," he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "that you were angry your son had become more successful than you?" "My son's success," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "was all I ever wanted. This is not about success. This is about survival." The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of my life being dissected under the harsh glare of courtroom lights. 3 days of watching my son's lawyer try to turn me into a monster. But the evidence was too strong. The notebook, the lab results, the testimonies of David and Olivia, they formed an unbreakable chain. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim and set. The foreman, a man about my age with work-worn hands, stood and cleared his throat. He didn't look at Leo. He looked at the judge. "On the charge of attempted murder, we, the jury, find the defendant." He paused, and in that split second of silence, I felt the entire weight of the last few months press down on me. "Guilty." A gasp went through the courtroom. Olivia broke into quiet sobs. I just sat there, frozen, as the judge set the sentencing date. Guilty. The word was both a vindication and a death sentence. Justice had been served, but my son was lost to me forever. As the bailiffs led him away, Leo finally looked at me. His face was a mask of cold fury. He didn't say a word, but his eyes screamed a promise. This isn't over. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. The judge was unsparing. He spoke of the calculated nature of the crime, the betrayal of trust, the profound harm done not just to David Miller, but to the very idea of family. Leo was sentenced to 25 years to life in the state penitentiary. As they led him out of the courtroom for the last time, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just a vast, hollow emptiness. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding winter sun. The war was over. I had won. But standing there alone on the cold stone steps, I had never felt more like a loser. The legal victory was clean, but the personal cost was immeasurable. I had lost the boy I'd raised, the memories I'd cherished, and a part of myself that had died in that courtroom. The days after the trial were the quietest. The reporters disappeared, the town's whispers faded, and I was left alone with the echoes. A week after the sentencing, a letter arrived from the state prison. The handwriting was Leo's, but the words were foreign, filled with a venom I had never seen. He didn't accept responsibility. He blamed me. He called me a monster, a manipulator who had framed him to steal his wife and his inheritance. The letter was a final, hateful confirmation that the son I knew was truly gone, replaced by a stranger consumed by his own darkness. I didn't reply. I simply folded the letter and placed it in the fireproof box with the rest of the evidence, a final, bitter chapter in a story I wished I'd never had to write. Healing began not as a choice, but as a necessity. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to live in the present. I started spending my afternoons with David, who was slowly regaining his strength. We'd sit on his porch, not saying much, just two old soldiers sharing a quiet battlefield. I helped Olivia with her garden, the simple act of turning soil and planting seeds a small rebellion against the destruction that had torn through our lives. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. One cold afternoon, I sat down with my lawyer. There was the matter of the money I had once saved for Leo's future, a future that no longer existed. I thought about what to do with it for a long time. Giving it to Olivia felt wrong, like blood money. Keeping it felt even worse. So, I made a different choice. I used it to establish the Helen Hayes Scholarship, named for my late wife, a fund for local kids from Northwood who wanted to study science but didn't have the means. It was a way to turn something poisonous into something that could grow. The story doesn't end with a neat bow. There is no reconciliation, no tearful reunion. There is only the quiet aftermath. I still live in the old house, the silence a constant companion. Some days it feels like peace. Other days it just feels empty. I lost my son, but in the wreckage, I found something else. Myself. A man who, when faced with an unthinkable betrayal, chose to stand for the truth, no matter the cost. And some nights, when the Ohio wind howls around the corners of the house, I think I can hear my wife's voice, whispering that it was the only choice I ever could have made. The ending must be profound, summarizing the story's themes without mentioning characters. It should also include a call to action. What we build in our lives, families, futures, legacies, are all built on a foundation of trust. But what happens when that foundation is poisoned from within? When love is twisted into a weapon, and kindness is seen as weakness? This story is a testament to the quiet strength it takes to face a devastating truth, to choose the hard path of justice over the easy silence of denial. It reminds us that true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the courage to stand firm in the wreckage and plant something new. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that matter.